It's a minute since I've done a sit-down video, but I got a few minutes before my next client, so I thought I would do a video podcast, essentially like a sit-down kind of chat, but with notes, so I don't go on too much of a tangent, because this topic of quitting social media, I have a lot to say about it, but then it sort of whittles down into a couple of points. So if you are not familiar with me, my name's Dr. Erin Bao. I'm a clinical and perinatal psychologist. I'm an author. And last year, I decided I was going to take a break from social media. That's kind of how it started, like 8 weeks from International Women's Day through to Mother's Day. That sort of felt like significant and important. And I thought, I'm just going to experiment and see what it does with my mood. So I took a basic, like, run-of-the-mill standard measure, which, assessing yourself, not super like scientific, but I did it anyway, on anxiety, depression, and stress. And I really didn't necessarily think it would make that much of a difference. It was just, I knew it was becoming something that was more in my life than I really wanted it to be. I had kind of all these things that I would say that I hear lots of other people say too about, I need this, like, I'd like to quit it, I'd like to stop using it, I'd like to use it less, all those kind of vague statements, but I need it for my business. And I never tested it. I've never actually seen, how does my business do with and without it? How's my mental health with and without it? So I did that for 8 weeks and was pretty like gobsmacked, really, like how much of a difference it made for my stress, for my anxiety, just for my mood overall, and how much of my time and life and stillness and headspace I got back. So that turned from a series of blog posts into then a book, Social Media Detox for Mums. So I've talked about the whole process in other snippets of work. This video, I want it to be not too much. So it's really just going to be like an 18-month update, I guess, and like some takeaways, including like things that I do miss about it. There are some things I miss about it, but I guess overall, I'm not going back. I can't see myself going back. So I'll talk you through some of the things that I've noticed, some of the thoughts I've had about it. So I am seeing increasingly people talk about it. Whenever I tell people I'm not on social media, or that I've done some sort of a detox, or that I've written this book, it's actually been overwhelmingly positive. I was kind of expecting more people to be like, no, like, who are you if you're not on social media and everybody's on social media? It's actually been, compared to like maybe 5 years ago, I remember when I was on social media, but not using it a lot. And then I guess 5 years ago, when my hypnobirthing business, that side of my business, was sort of picking up a bit, because I was having babies and I needed something to do that I could do it like on the weekends in between mum life. I thought, oh, yep, okay, I better do this thing. And compared to like 5 years ago, when everybody was like, what do you mean you're not on Instagram? Now it sort of seems to be like the response is more of a, yeah, I should do that. Oh, that's a good idea. Or these conversations that we keep having about, we know we should be on it less, but there's no real guidelines. So social media addiction per se, we know it's an addiction. Of course it's an addiction, but it's not in here. So it's not in the DSM, which is the big book of mental disorders that psychiatrists and psychologists like me use to diagnose things. So it's not in there. But then I would argue these things take a really, really, really long time to circle around. Like being gay used to be in the DSM, right? It takes a really long time for things to pick up in science and medicine in particular, and sort of get on board with the rest of mainstream. So just because it's not in the book doesn't mean it's not an addiction. It fits all the other criteria that we have of behavioral addictions, like, all the things that people do. Too much shopping, too much drinking, too much gambling, too much shopping, too much, like whatever you're doing that is making you not feel like your best self and filling you with shame instead of self-compassion. And you can't stop, right? So for me, social media felt like a thing that I just felt I had to do every day, and I got too overwhelming. So stopping it has allowed me to do some research, which I wasn't open to in the beginning. I used to hear, oh, social media is addictive, and just ignore it. Right? I don't want to hear that message, which You got to get to your own discoveries in your own time. So I'm not someone who says nobody should be on it, you should all quit. It's just, here's the information, make your own grown-up choices, but it's better to be informed and make a choice than sort of just keep going along with something because that's what everybody else is doing, right? So I think the phrase that came to me when I was thinking about like this particular conversation is the idea that in trauma therapy, there's this phrase that we use sometimes about like, if you don't ask, you won't be told. So if we're not asking people questions about how is social media impacting your mental health, particularly as clinicians, the way I want to talk about, I suppose, the particular things I'm thinking about today are maintenance. I keep wondering about this. So maintenance meaning when you've got something that you are trying to change, like a behavior you're trying to change, whatever that might be. The extreme example I give, because in some ways it's relatable, but it takes you enough outside of your own experience that you don't start over-identifying too much, is when I used to work with heroin addicts and ice addicts as part of Melbourne's homeless population. That was a job I did for a while. You spend 1 hour a week with people as a psychologist, and in that hour, you maybe build up people's confidence, you build up their sense of worth, you get them really motivated, really excited about making this change in their life, and then they go back out into the world and they've got 24 hours a day for another 6 or 7 days usually with a bunch of other people who are all saying, this is, this is what you should be doing. It's culturally enmeshed in your life, if you like. So it's really hard when the people around you in your small circle, your bigger circle, and your even bigger circle are all telling you something different, that it's not that bad, that you'll get by, and also just coping with the pain. There's not a human alive that doesn't do, to some extent, maladaptive things that we all wish we wouldn't do to help us cope with pain. That's just what we do. So I think about it in terms of, if you're going to therapy, if you're getting coaching, if you're working on something in your life, whether that's your self-image, your body image, some other sort of addiction, family crap, trauma, all the things people go to therapy for, you spend 1 hour with someone and you build up your self-worth and your self-confidence, and you get strategies and you learn how to cope and you manage a bit of your trauma, chipping it away at a time. But then you go back to your house and your kids are screaming and you're wondering how to pay the bills and the house is falling apart and the dog has just vomited and then ate it again, like life. So you pick up your phone and you want to tune out, or you want to feel like you're connecting with people because you feel isolated. So of course, there's good things about social media, not denying that. I'm just potentially here to talk about the things that is not just bad, like don't use it because it's bad, but thinking about it from a like, just putting on some curiosity and going, I wonder how this impacts maintenance. We think about younger people, not necessarily younger people, but people who are struggling with self-image and bodies and food and all of that sort of stuff. And you've got handful, if you're lucky, of adults in your life telling you to love yourself just as you are, that food is not the enemy, that these black and white rules do not apply, that the dieting industry and culture is a complete and utter brainwashing machine and has been for a really long time. You listen to a bit of that messaging, and then again, you go home and you go on socials and you are flooded with messaging that says something completely different. How can you possibly compete with that? So we know that it's doing damage to our young people, and we're having conversations about that. But what about ourselves and our own sense of peace and our own opinions and what we think about ourselves? So I've wondered that. I've wondered how many mums in particular go to therapy, get the coaching, do something, feel good for that hour, feel like it's hard. Like, of course it's hard, but feel something like, okay, something inside myself, internal messaging is starting to get me where I want to go. And then you go on social media and you're just flooded with all these external messages, a lot of which we don't even consciously pay attention to go, oh, is that my thought? Do I agree with that thought? Is that a thought that I value? It's really, really, really hard. And as I said at the start, a lot of the tools, guidance is really, really vague. It's like, just use it less. Go on a detox for a weekend. Like, there's a lot of strategies out there that are designed to set people up to fail because they're just not specific enough. They're really blamey and judgy and put all the onus back on the individual, which is kind of like a band-aid, right? It's what the tobacco industry used to do. It's what the dieting culture used to do. It's what a huge part of, I guess, the online machine that is people flogging a course. I mean, I'm not into that. I flog courses of books too. But this idea that if you just do this one thing that worked for this one person and you follow the steps and you pay the money, it will work for you. And if it doesn't work for you, there must be something wrong with you, instead of let's look at the bigger culture. It's that old, actually, I don't know if it's that old, but the quote about when the flower's not blooming, you don't blame the flower, you look at the environment in which the flower is growing in. So instead of like looking at all the internal reasons why you're having trouble with social media, let's look at the culture that we're in. Let's look at a few things going on there, particularly for the way that our culture values or doesn't value women. That's a whole other podcast to get into. But I want to talk about, I suppose, a couple of notes that I made 18 months reflecting, that it's only a couple of points. So first of all, I really noticed that more than not, social media drained my energy rather than topped it up. So I was going there for a quick dopamine boost, a quick numbing from the monotony sometimes that is being at home, particularly during lockdown with small kids, and realizing that little dopamine burst that I got was like short-lived. It wasn't the same. This sort of fits into another point, but I guess we know, like, connection isn't the same. It's just not the same as actually having that in-person warmth and the whites of the eyes and the, picking up on other people's energy. Through a screen, it's a bit static. Like, it's better than nothing. And I'm not saying don't have online relationships, but it's not connection. It's not connection. It's not the same. It's not the same. But I think when you're constantly flipping between tasks as well, so standing there trying to cook the pasta, the dog needs to go out, some kid's nagging you for a biscuit, and you're there like checking, like for me, I've got to check and respond to my, comments, because this is how you build a business and this is how you get connection and engagement and all of that. It just felt like work was never off. And I think like that's okay that other people can manage that. That's fine if other people have been able to do that. I just haven't. I haven't been able to, for my particular makeup, energy, whatever it might be, completely and utterly switch that off. So in the end, for me, it just became something that was draining my energy rather than making me feel topped up, especially compared to reading a passage of a book, listening to a podcast, something like that, as opposed to sitting and reading a bunch of posts for an hour. Like, I know that that's a no-brainer and it sounds really simple. I have to say, like, getting back into reading was hard for me. There is research, if you look for it, that shows that when you spend time on social media, journalists talk about this as well, the effect where you're just used to reading these short, sharp things, like deep reading and reading for pleasure is actually quite difficult. So don't beat yourself up if you kind of go, yeah, but reading a book is really hard. It is hard. It is hard. I did a PhD and reading a book is hard for me because my brain is primed just like scan for the headlines and not actually sit and read slowly for the joy of things. It is hard. But ultimately, I guess that's what it's about. It's putting in just that tiny little bit of effort when you think you can't be bothered with effort. And we're talking like I started with a paragraph and half a page and then a page and then a chapter. And the time that you get back when you're not scrolling is kind of amazing. And again, talking about that energy top up, my energy, particularly at the end of the day, low dopamine. Going off social media really helped me realize, particularly in winter, particularly after these few years of pandemic burnout, I got no dopamine left at the end of the day. So then it's not an idea for me to go on and try and navigate all these chutes and ladders of dealing, I suppose, with other people's inner child wounding. That thing that happens when people are upset, they're emotional, they don't necessarily know what it's about. And then they get on and start ranting about things, or not even necessarily that, but misinterpret comments. And then it's like, if this emoji is not exactly right and you mistyped it, someone's going to misinterpret you. There's a lot of energy that goes into building the blocks of making sure that you are communicating perfectly at all times. And I haven't got the energy for that. So yeah, using social media is a way for me to try and like relax, zone out. Numbing, it's not the same thing as those other things. And thinking that you can, I don't know, I almost want to, it's like a computer game where you're just wandering around and you're like trying to avoid the landmines. And that's often how it felt. I haven't been able to figure out a way to just make it all tortoises eating watermelon and funny cat videos. It just hasn't worked out, particularly when I was using it for business. I only ever used Instagram for business. It just became too much. It's also only one way to connect. There is, particularly if you're in a helping, healing, assisting role, and there's a lot of us, women in particular, women identifying people who are drawn to that, to feel a sense of purpose, like feel a sense of mastery, feel a sense of usefulness, which for me was definitely a thing. Like, it's not uncommon, I don't think, but we don't speak about it enough, where you spend all day with your kids and yeah, okay, it's hard and it's wonderful and it's rewarding and all of that, but nobody tells you that you're doing a very good job. Nobody says thank you very often. You don't get to use those skills that you used in a previous life, where you just, when you're in, again, a helper or healer role, you can provide information and someone is like, oh, thank you so much for sharing this. This has like changed my day, as opposed to just wiping butts and, you know, going through the motions with child rearing, especially when you've had no sleep. So trying to figure out where I fit in terms of that. I can't be doing the work I used to do, like 5-6 days a week, as I used to do as a therapist, but I'm really, really missing that need to be useful and that need to be helpful. And it seemed, I suppose, for a while, like being on social media, being a therapist on social media was a way to do that. You know, being mindful of the fact that not everybody can afford therapy, not everybody can afford coaching. I'm a big believer in, when you've got good information that can help another person, you share it. You don't keep it to yourself and just keep it to the confines of a therapy room. That's one way to help. Instagram is only one way to help. And in the end, it's tricky to put in those boundaries, I think, to go, how much helping, how much time. I can tell you the day that I decided to not use Instagram anymore or any social media anymore, because I had 45 unread DMs, and a lot of them were from people with really like quite complex, significant trauma stuff, all wanting help. And it's, I think of the analogy of, you know, you're standing on the beach and there's a starfish and you want to pick it up and help it and not save it. People don't need saving. That's not the analogy I'm going for, but this idea of like, oh, you're here, you can help. And then you turn and you look and there's just so many others. Like, how many do you help? How do you protect your energy? So for me, being wired and tired at night after, like, my kids don't sleep, 7 years essentially of not sleeping, doing that, especially at nighttime, was not good for my energy. So that's another thing I would say that I have noticed. I'm just having a quick look through notes, because I did make notes and then I kind of went off them. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's another point I wanted to make. This idea of cruel optimism. I talk about this in some other posts and things I've written, because I've been thinking about it a lot in terms of like, yeah, what do I want to say about that? There is definitely an effect, I think, where in the entrepreneurial space, potentially, let's say, there are, because I see them and I was one of them, so many women who have a big heart and want to help and want to build a business. And so you start taking all these courses and you follow the instructions that were given to you by someone so long ago, you can't even remember where the original advice came from, about just be consistent, just keep showing up, show up to your audience every day and talk to them and be helpful. You know, use these certain terms, use these, like, if you just stick at it, you too will get there. because there's always a story of someone who built their business on Facebook 5 years ago and it worked for them. So they're still sort of doing the same, like, yeah, this can work for you too. And I think not just for entrepreneurial things, but sleep training, some sort of something where you want to change the look, shape, size of your body. Your child's a fussy eater, like some sort of problem. We know this now. It's like becoming more mainstream, this idea. It's not rocket science. You find a problem, you find the pain point, you tell people how to solve the pain point with whatever it is that you've got that's going to solve the pain point. And it's this cruel thing that is toxic positivity, or maybe you could call it cruel optimism, where it's like, if you just think positive and you just do the steps and you just do this, everything will work out and be fine. And like I alluded to before, if it doesn't, and it doesn't for a lot of people, that person will blame themselves. Instead of going, oh, this program, like I'm an outlier, it didn't work for me, I must be one of the, 1% or less that it didn't work for. But this is a thing. And I think social media is set up to be this machine, if you like, that wants us to keep being on it. It doesn't want us to leave it and then go off and have conversations in person or use business strategies that people have been using for a lot longer than social media. Companies want us to be there. They want our eyeballs on their platform. And so there is a lot of this undertone of, if you're just positive and you're just consistent and you just do this, but then there's no limit to it. Like, what, 7 reels a week, 7 reels a day? Like, it's only just going to get more and more and more content. And I think people are struggling a bit with this thing that there's no parameters. There's no parameters around. If you just keep doing more and more and more of this, you will get to the point where you want to get. You'll be an influencer, you'll be successful, you have $1 million, whatever there is, whatever the goal has been. But then what? Like, does it actually work? It works for a small amount of people, a small amount of the time. And I think a lot of us are spending a lot more time than we ever wanted to spend, let's put it that way, on social media without ever testing, is it doing what you set up to do? So another thing I talk about in my work and in my book a lot is this concept of Pareto's principle. So the idea is, if you put in 80%, you should get 20% of the results back. I always encourage people, if you're not sure about social media, particularly if you've got a business, think about that, test it. If you're putting in 80% of your time, so you're posting every day, or you're doing what I used to do, sit down on a Sunday afternoon and sit down with all your scheduling software and get it all done, and blah, 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 are you getting 20% of the results back? No, I was shocked when I actually looked at my business stats and went, I'm not actually getting even anywhere near 20% of income, whatever it might be, selling books, selling courses, whatever it was my goal was. I don't even remember what my goal was. I just like, oh, you're going to be on social media. So I encourage you to think about that. What did you set up to do when you started there? What's your intention? Does anyone actually set an intention when you open up your phone and go to those socials? No, of course not. You just end up there. So like anything, unless you set an intention, you're going to get wonky results or no results. So it's just, these are small things to think about. They're not like hard and fast rules, I think, that anybody needs to follow. Some people will find that social media definitely helps their business, and without it, they wouldn't get the results that they want. Cool, do that. That's fine. If you found a way to do that and your mental health's good, all power to you. I'm speaking to that person who is sort of in the uncertain, I'm doing this thing. I'm turning up every day. I'm showing up. I'm making the videos. I'm making the content. I'm trying to be consistent and wondering where it's actually getting them. And not just that, but how is it impacting their mental health? How is it impacting their sense of self? How is it impacting their parenting? These are the conversations I want us to be having. I want us to be thinking about the fact that it was always designed to be addictive. Here it is, 5+ years on, where having people like me, I trained as a clinical psychologist. Of course, there's huge parts of me that's like, oh, I should have known better. I shouldn't get addicted to things. I'm a human first before anything else. And I'm saying I had this training and this knowledge and this experience. I still got addicted to it. So, like, what does that tell you? I don't know. I know I'm not alone in this. This is why I talk about these things. Like I said, 18 months later, would it go back? No. You have things that you miss, sure. I miss the conversations. I miss the conversations with people. But the other thing that's tricky that people don't talk about is this kind of, we could call it like disenfranchised grief, in terms of you build a network of people, some of them you know offline as well. So it's not as if these are all just Instagram friends. And when I stopped using it, there are people who have not contacted me since. Not a message, not a phone call, not a pigeon, nothing. And that has to be okay. Like, I kind of expected that was going to happen. The thing that slightly wasn't expected is like friends I've known for a really long time, or at least people, that thing, you know, the high school wounding thing that happens sometimes, where you're like, oh, I think I thought we were better friends than they thought we were friends. That's okay. It's about acknowledging the fact that relationships can be transitory, and you don't always have people in your life for the amount of time that you expect necessarily. And I do think this is a thing that you have to be prepared for, that if you quit social media for a significant amount of time, you're going to notice there are some people who never contact you ever again. It's hard, but it's true. People who have your phone number, people who can send you a text, people who you even occasionally used to sometimes see, just won't contact you. Just won't contact you. And then, you know, that thing of like, you have people who contact you daily, the people who like your posts every single day or whatever, and you're like, oh, that's nice. Like, that's gone. I have to talk to an actual person if I want to talk to an actual person now. That's okay. It's all right. It's part of, I think, preparing yourself for it. Yes, your mental health is going to significantly improve, potentially, but there's some stuff to sort through with that. And that is it lifts the veil of making you see things that you maybe don't want to see. And I think you have to prepare yourself for that and go back into the self-compassion, go back into all the validating and be like, just because this is what other people want to do, it doesn't have to be what I do. So I'm just offering this as insight, information, encouragement, not a like, you can't keep doing this or something terrible is going to happen. This has just been my experience. And it's been probably a longer chat than I anticipated it being, but I hope it was useful, and I will talk to you next time.